is really sabotaging Russia-Ukraine peace talks?
Since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, peace negotiations between the two sides have been rare. One reason, according to Ted Snyder, a columnist specializing in US foreign policy and history, is that Europe and Western media have contributed to stifling diplomatic efforts. In a commentary published on antiwar.com, Ted Snyder emphasized that even in the first weeks of the war, when Russia and Ukraine had begun bilateral negotiations, the West, led by the US, the UK, and Poland, discouraged the peace process. Instead, they pushed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky away from a promising path of diplomacy and onto the road of war, with the pledge, whatever Ukraine needs, we will provide for as long as it takes. A preliminary draft of a peace plan bearing the signatures of both warring parties was dismissed, making way for 3 years of brutal warfare. At the time, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson declared that Russian President Vladimir Putin should be pressured, not negotiated with, and told Zelensky that Ukraine should fight to the end. Instead of encouraging diplomacy, which could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives, prevented an international crisis, and averted the risk of World War III, the US ramped up military aid, supplying Ukraine with NATO's most advanced weapons. Now, there is renewed hope that peace talks may resume. Russian and Ukrainian delegations have met again for the first time since the initial negotiations, opening the door to a new round of direct dialogue. Yet, once again, instead of supporting the process, Europe and Western media are continuing to ignore and suffocate these diplomatic efforts. Instead of using their influence to encourage Ukraine to negotiate with Russia, European powers pressured Ukraine to put forth maximalist conditions, demands they knew would ensure Russia would continue fighting. They tried to persuade the Trump administration that President Putin was merely pretending to want peace, and that he aimed to conquer all of Europe. They continued to call for harsher sanctions on Russia and more military aid for Ukraine. Rather than advancing peace, newly appointed German Chancellor Friedrich Merz declared on May 26 that Germany had lifted the range limitations on weapons sent to Ukraine, a restriction that his predecessor, along with the US, had firmly maintained to avoid crossing red lines that could drag NATO into a full-scale war with Russia, or even World War III. Merz also revealed that the UK, France, and the US had similarly lifted restrictions on long-range weapons, allowing Ukraine to strike deep into Russian territory. Russia responded with strong warnings. Russian officials issued a stern statement, warning that if these decisions had indeed been made, they are completely at odds with our desire for a political solution, and they undermine ongoing efforts to reach an agreement. These are extremely dangerous decisions, if they have truly been approved.
Ukraine to get missiles with 1,400 kilometers range?
As the West announces the lifting of restrictions on striking targets inside Russian territory, Ukrainian media suggest that the most powerful long-range weapon Ukraine could acquire is not Germany's famed Taurus missile, nicknamed the Divine Arrow, but another type of cruise missile. Following German Chancellor Friedrich Merz's declaration removing all limitations on Ukraine's use of Western-supplied weapons to attack targets within Russia, including those provided by the US, the UK, and France, public attention has shifted to the actual capabilities of the missiles currently available, according to Ukraine's Defense Express. The UK and France had already supplied Ukraine with Storm Shadow Scalp long-range cruise missiles in 2023. These missiles, with a range of about 250 kilometers, were reportedly used by Kyiv to strike Russian territory in late 2024. Another frequently mentioned weapon is the German-made Taurus cruise missile, which has a range of 560 kilometers and is highly sought after by Ukraine. However, it is not the longest-range European missile currently available. According to Defense Express, the longest-range missile under discussion is the MDCN, also known as the ship-launched version of the Scalp, developed by France. This missile, Ukrainian media noted, is not only in mass production but also currently deployed by the French military. The MDCN, developed from the Scalp platform, has a declared range of up to 1,400 kilometers and carries a warhead weighing around 300 kilograms. It is designed to be launched from a 70 silver vertical launch systems on warships, each launcher standing about 7 meters tall. Ukrainian media suggest that the MDCN is the true long-range weapon Ukraine could potentially acquire, surpassing both the Taurus and Storm Shadow in capability. The reason is that maximum range figures do not fully reflect a missile's real-world performance. Cruise missiles like the Storm Shadow or Taurus typically do not fly in straight lines, but follow complex routes to evade enemy air defenses. While the Taurus is advertised with a range of 560 kilometers, its actual effective range may be reduced due to launch positions being 80 to 90 kilometers from the front line and the missile's zigzag flight path. Currently, there is no public information confirming that France will transfer MDCN missiles to Ukraine, but Paris has also not ruled out the possibility.